Okay, item 12 now, unfinished business, WCET PEG fees. You recall that we had last taken up this issue several months ago. We had presentations made to us by a number of different individuals. I think you each received recently a review and analysis that was done, and hopefully you've availed yourself of the opportunity to look through that. So we had last tabled a motion and postponed, I should say, the item until this meeting in June, and there had been the motion to eliminate those PEG fees. At this time then, the issue is on the floor, brought back on the floor, and is there anyone who wishes to make a motion at this time based on the further information we've received since our last time addressing this issue? I look to my left because I know that Michael and John, you're each part of that committee, and I know that you've maybe been to some degree part of the process since we last met. I understand they met, I don't know, 3 or 4 occasions, and there was an analysis done and a report that was put together. Did you have a chance to be part of some or all of that? And if so, have you got an update on the perspective you might lend the board from your involvement?
Well, Jim, they called in a number of representatives from Hudsonville, Jenison Schools, Granville Schools, and particularly from Grand Valley State College. And they're looking at a long-term plan that they could implement that could help with the transition, because Alan's been such a pillar there. And as Alan retires, what can they do to still keep the high quality that they've had throughout the years? They put incredible man-hours into it, seem to have a strong plan. The commitment from the other municipalities seems very strong. They'd like to see it continue. What we were looking at was the possibility of eliminating some of the PEG funds that really don't run through us. But if they were not utilizing them in a useful way, should that be done to save the taxpayers money? From what I observed, they're incredibly professional. They've got a history of doing that. It was amazing that they were all brought together trying to keep it going. To cut the PEG funds at this time, I think would be sending a wrong message. And with that many people trying to help them through this time, even though we know that the world is changing and cable use is changing, there has to be some type of transition if it will exist in some type of form in the future. But for right now, my personal feeling is that this would be a drastic move. And with the support that's been given from the other communities, they would be bewildered. And I think we saw that when Ken Crombie came and gave his presentation from Granville. Ken has been around maybe not quite as long as Dan, but he has that long history in the community. And he's been the driving force behind this, along with a number of others. My recommendation would be to step back and certainly give them time to see if they can implement this agenda. That if we did it at this time, I feel we'd be cutting the legs out from under them. They would be bewildered. They were that we took this stand earlier. I would hope we would wait.
Would there ever be a time, John, when someone like yourself, who's been supportive, been part of the committee there, would ever support such a move? I mean, is there a point at which you'd say, okay, I agree, this is maybe not the best use of these fees?
I would say yes, but I would say right now there was a concern about the monies going towards equipment and were they using that money wisely. When you listen to Alan explain how they're planning to the future and adapting this to technology, it makes sense. But the overall picture with technology, it's going to be tough for these programs to survive. Whether or not they come up with a form of self-support, I don't know. I think we're living through that transition right now. But I think we would be hastening their demise if we did this at this time. I'm concerned about, Alan has shown such leadership that when he goes, it's going to be tough. But these other municipalities have stepped up. They've put their most important, excuse me, but individuals that are heavy hitters in the community for a long time. They seem very committed to this. And so the gentlemen that were from Grand Valley State College very professionally put together a plan. They were enthusiastic. It was contagious. I would give them a chance. I think our concern when this first came up was the money being wasted? I think it's obvious that it's not.
Part of the concern had been even, is the money being used? To some degree, there was an accumulation, but you're right, it was also, the companion concern was what is it being used for when it is used? All right, appreciate that perspective. I looked at the list of those who are part of the committee. I saw Virgil Leatherman's name on there. Yeah. Virgil gave me my first job in high school a long, long time ago, and I haven't seen him in forever.
He's still enthusiastic.
He's still involved in things, isn't he? Yeah. Michael, if I may, I'd like to call on you too as part of that committee and maybe as part of the process that's taken place the last several months. What is your perspective?
There's definitely that push to find the relevancy or the self-sustainability of the station. And I don't recall it ever being a point of the money's being wasted. I think it was just there was an excess of money that kept accumulating. And Gary made a great point, this was quite a few meetings ago, about right in the contract it says that personnel is to be provided by the schools as well as their station. So that's the school's responsibility. So that's the issue has always been that personnel funding. PEG fees can't be used for the personnel. Besides the fact the schools are supposed to be providing the employees or hiring the staff. I think the strategic planning went good. There were a lot of concerns that we've had for the past 5 years. And it's that, could it be moved to a model where it is a for-profit, but because of the PEG fees, it cannot be. So it's a tough situation where a road has to be taken, whether it stays with PEG fees and the public entity or it goes private, and what the future holds. I just don't see that the PEG fees making that big of a difference. It'd be nice to have, as far as equipment goes, it's such an ever-changing technology with the way things were. Back in 20 years ago, it was a great resource for people to have their own radio or television show or talk show, where now it's YouTube. I mean, 8-year-old kids have 500,000 subscribers, and within 2 hours of posting a video, they've got 1 million views. That's probably the technology, and they're doing these with iPhones and GoPros, and there's so many variables that go into it. It's hard to say spending $300,000 on equipment, would that make a difference? I don't think so. So it's not an easy answer. I just think that the way things are moving, I just don't see how that PEG is going to really would help. I mean, it's going to give money to spend on more equipment down the road, but what I believe the balance right now is $232,000 of restricted PEG fees, so pretty big chunk of change.
So you would be in favor of terminating the PEG fee?
And that was a tough one too. I talked to a number of people because I used to be a cable subscriber, but I cut the cord. So it doesn't affect me whatsoever. But I just randomly sampled probably 30, 35 people and just said, WCET, your cable bill. Do you have cable? Yep. You watch WCET. What's WCET? And I had some people, and once I explained it's a public access station where you could come and do your own show, and it records government meetings, school functions, sporting events. They're like, oh, that's cool. And then I say, now, they're getting PEG fees, and the township is discussing, do we eliminate those PEG fees, the pass-through, and it would save you $1.50 or $2. Some people said, well, yeah, it's $2. Other people like, I don't care. So it was, I'd say, probably 60% were, yeah, I'll take my $2. And then the other were a mix of, yeah, I guess it's only a couple hours, so they weren't. So it wasn't
Per billing cycle, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So it wasn't, an overwhelming, definitely I want my $2. And I think that's part of it too. And the strategic planning talked about how do we reach out to people and let them know it's here. And if people don't know about it, people I talked to didn't know about it. So I guess if you inform people what it is, will they start accessing that, going to it? Like I'm going to tune into their TV channel, whether it be, I say 24 on Comcast and 98 or 99 on AT&T. Would they tune into it? I have no idea. But just based on the response, a lot of people just don't know what it is and don't watch. So
John is clearly supportive of seeing it continue. You sound like you're of the opposite point of view. You believe that we could cut those PEG fees at this point?
Yeah, I'd be leaning towards, I don't want it to be something that would affect them in their function. I was really hoping the strategic plan would be here's the path we're going, and be working on that, and incorporating how these PEG fees are going to make all the difference. And from what I could tell from the strategic planning sessions, it wasn't necessarily as everything's hinging on these PEG fees. And even, with the discussion of the the agreement with Granville and Hudsonville, who is going to pay for that, a building, a space for them to televise out of, and who's going to pay for staff. It's covered under that, so that's really not an issue there either. But
Question, I think I know the answer to this, but maybe others know more definitively. If we were to cut PEG fees, I don't think we can ever go back to charging them, say in the future, if a future board said, we think they're useful and beneficial and we ought to reinstitute PEG fees. Do we know the answer to that? I looked briefly into it. My initial take was, I don't think we can.
Well, you have an agreement period, so I'm assuming you would have to wait till the agreement period expired and then when you renegotiated the agreement. But yes, it would be a hard road at that point to justify raising that tax again, knowingly once you did that.
At our meeting, Alan had brought up that they're looking at different types of cameras that would keep up with technology, and that was one of the areas that they wanted to see the PEG fees going towards. That if they were going to adapt to new technology, they needed to have those monies available. I think that the concern of the board was, why do you have all this money and it's not being spent? And Alan answered that. They've got a huge committee working on trying to get a long-term plan to make it a success. Like I said, I feel we're cutting the legs out from under them if we just say no. And it's not coming out of our coffers. Would be a savings that they'd have on their bill directly with Comcast if Comcast passes it along. I don't know what their requirements are. And it's not for every taxpayer. It's those that have that particular service. So I almost feel we're stepping out of an area that we normally would not be involved in. If we thought there was some corruption, things were being handled poorly, but it's not been like that at all.
Yeah.
If anything, it's handled incredibly well, and now you've got communities that are desperately trying to keep this thing going, and we'd be sending this message of cutting them. They're bewildered. And the first thing that comes up is you're talking cost of a cup of coffee over a long period of time.
Sure.
Jim, I have a couple.
I was going to say, just real quickly, historically, this is an issue that's come up every couple, 3 years, and I look out here and see Chad out here, and I distinctly remember us talking about it back when Chad was a member of the board, so it's not a new issue, it's not a new question. Technology has changed even more each time we revisited the question. And I think at times, too, out of deference and respect for Alan, there was a reticence to, with someone who's given their career to it, to curtail anything prematurely if he's, nearing retirement and so on. Now we know for a fact that Alan is on his way out. Now, of course, anybody who's poured their life's work into something like this isn't going to want to see it go, whether they're there or not. But I do know there's been various concerns that each time has sort of led to some deference and some delay. And yes, Catherine.
I appreciate the fact that so much time has been spent on doing various meetings and bringing together different stakeholders and whatnot, but a concern that I see is that there's been months of information or months of these meetings and planning and bringing people together, and the reports that are generated, not that they don't look professional, but it doesn't have any clear, clear plans laid out as to really what's tangible, what's going to happen, how is this going to look, how do we combat something I think you had brought up was the, it's just a different time. And I guess that kind of goes to your point too, Jim, that, the technology has changed each time the conversation has come up. And so to a certain degree, we're talking about, it's not, no matter what kind of plan, this could be the world's best plan with all kinds of specific points on community engagement or different relationship building or different things that they could do, or getting the word out and letting people know that it's there, and different resources like that could be made more available and utilized. But to the extent that you can't just ignore what is happening right now, and especially with March of 2020 forward, where we had COVID and everything, was shut down physically, and so people turned to even more so YouTube or, Facebook Lives or whatever the case may be. I was going to say 3 teenagers, but one's not a teenager anymore. I have a 20-year-old, but my 3 older kids, or even that one, might know more about some of this than I do. But and we don't have cable, and we don't have we don't have either of those providers, so it's not like it's a personal thing for me either. But it's something we can't ignore, that it's just a different world than in the 80s and the 90s, even, into 2000 and beyond, that we are seeing the way information gets to our local communities is just vastly different. A lot of communities don't have their local newspapers anymore, or they, just all kinds of things are changing. So I think, we can't ignore that, and it's hard to say, well, we have this, with all these statistics and these graphs and charts and things, there's not really specific points where things are going from point A to point B, and unless I've been reading wrong, it seems like this, the whole time frame that these things are supposed to be happening it's been happening much slower than the time frame that we were told. Like the reports and things we were initially given talked about having meetings like in March and April, or that was the initial financial report, I think, going forward. And then the meetings and reports were supposed to be done by the beginning of May, and so we were supposed to have reports, it says in early May. And then we didn't get these until a couple days ago, so I think that communities, we want to make sure that with what's in this final report, a lot of the things they're concerned about and making sure people are more aware of civics and, people are more engaged. I think we all would want that. We all want people to be more engaged. But the other thing I heard too, it is kind of a chicken and the egg, but there has been money for quite some time for the equipment. That hasn't been the problem. But what I have heard, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I got this wrong, but what I have heard being spoken about is that it's been a significant personnel issue for quite some time. It's not a new problem, that it was, more and more issue. And although I didn't know the logistics, I didn't grow up here, I'm not from here like some of you are, I did read the initial contract whenever we were given it 3 months ago or 4 months ago, something like that. And I saw the same thing, that I guess, I don't recall you talking about it, but Michael Bosch, you said that it was Gary, so I guess you and I saw the same thing, that it's supposed to be the schools that are providing personnel, and if it's been falling on him, that's not, but so it's not, personnel issues haven't, that's not a new problem, you know what I mean? So we're talking about years and years of problem, and then you take all those thoughts about the technology that we're seeing and the personnel issues and the way that the contract reads, and then I understand, John's perspective that this isn't something that is a, every single member of the, or, resident of the township. It's not a direct, say, tax that every single person has to pay. I get that, but it's still an obligation that we're tasked with looking at. And so whether it's, I don't know what the percentage or exact numbers of people are these days with these services, but if we're responsible for, thousands of people being charged this fee, $2 might not seem, on each bill very much to us, but maybe it is to somebody else. And so it's not, I don't think it's something that we could just say, oh, it's, it's been this way, or it's not, every single taxpayer, so it's not really something we should look at that way. It is the taxpayers' funds, one way or another, and we do have a responsibility to be responsible with how we're impacting that with our votes. So I guess that's just my thoughts on it. Just if you look at all those pieces together, again, I don't have a personal stake in that. I don't have cable. We probably don't get over in the air anymore either, but for what it's worth.
I want to look to Ryan in part here too as a technology guy. So this is an honest question on my part. So I'm not a cable subscriber. This is not a tax that I pay, so to speak. I know many in the residents do pay it. It seems like a dying model. It seems like the funding model is a dying model as well, as people cut the cord, right? As there's fewer and fewer cable subscribers and they find other ways to get their content and information, technology, and entertainment. So is it the case, because one of the things I saw in this report is, if you guys read the report, it says they can't determine how many people are watching, right? There is no good way. And I called Ken Crombie, and I talked to him again once this report came out. We had a nice conversation, very thoughtful about this. I think very balanced in his view. He's not, he doesn't just see the good and not the bad. He's very, very even-handed, I felt. But Ken agreed. He said, yeah, we don't have, there is really no good way to know how many people are viewing. Now, I think in some respects we get a sense of it by the fact that we hear very little. So, for example, tonight, there's no one here saying, how are you even considering this? I mean, there's no one from the public here. There were very few complaints after the last time it came up. It doesn't seem to be something that deeply resonates. But there again, that's sort of an anecdotal way of saying, is this a big deal or isn't it? We don't have measurements. We don't have tools to know. Because I don't have cable, I've never seen it. I've been on the board for 13, 14 years. Where I've never seen WCET. I've seen it though when someone has played something and posted it to the web. And that's what I want to ask you about, Ryan, and that is, I see that as I looked, in preparation for the meeting, I'm looking at they're doing more of posting to YouTube. And on those, especially during COVID here, there's a higher viewership, right? Because more people were more prone to tune in remotely. And so, for example, a graduation ceremony or what have you had a decent amount of viewers. This is where my technology question comes in, which is, if the model that it was set up to be run by, that is, television station, playing on television, different television programs, if that model itself seems to be a dying model, and the new models that are replacing it have to do more with things that people can post to YouTube and some of those sharing sites, if they didn't exist to do those things, because they're beginning to transition and put more content onto YouTube, as opposed to onto, I guess they probably play it on WCET as well on the TV, but if that is where they start to get viewership and you can actually quantify how many views were there, in the absence, if they didn't exist, would someone be posting those same events just because, there's a vacuum there and something's going to fill it? Is that easy to do? Is that, hard to do? Is that something that if they didn't do it, it wouldn't be something that would be likely to be done? What's your perspective on that?
So I'll preface right away, I have had AT&T and Xfinity the entire time I've lived in this township. So I am actually one of the PEG payers for quite some time. I like it because of the speed of the internet and just having more things for my kids to watch. So to answer your question, I think this day and age, all you need is a phone. I mean, Facebook Live, YouTube, all those different aspects are the new way of how the generation is getting technology, getting news. I did actually turn to WCET, I think it was when we first brought it up, and had my kids watch it with me. It was a basketball game. They were concerned more so that they thought they were wearing glasses because they're used to the digital era. And unfortunately, it is behind its time as far as when it comes to technology. I remember bringing up at that previous one that I was concerned about the delay. Digital has been around for ages now. I mean, it's been around for quite some time. The fact that we still haven't upgraded it and we have $232,000 sitting in that is a concern for me. And I think when I brought it up, it was going to be about $40,000, $50,000 to convert to digital. My concern is, if that's the direction, why have we not already done it years ago? I did my own little test as well. I asked 58 friends and family, just randomly, just individuals that I had at my house, ranging from 16 years old all the way up to 63. 5 of them out of 58 actually ever even heard of WCET. That's a concern of mine. When I looked at kind of how we wanted to mimic the ceremony for Memorial Day, I watched their YouTube. I went through and used that form of media to watch the old ones, to kind of create the agenda, I guess you could say, in it. I just don't think, and to kind of answer your question, I don't think TV is the correct form anymore. I think it is online. It's streaming. It's using YouTube. I honestly liked their YouTube channel. It wasn't bad. It was a good way to watch, and you can go right through all that stuff.
So if I'm a grandma and I want to see my grandson, say, walk across the podium, get their diploma at the Jenison High School graduation in 2022, if WCET weren't covering and posting that, is that the sort of thing where you'd say, look, someone's going to post these events?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guarantee you, if you looked at that, I'll bet you it was live streamed.
Can I play devil's advocate
Go ahead.
for a second?
Yeah.
Because when WCET is there, they are down on the field with the good vantage point, getting the good camera angle, putting it together and putting it on their YouTube. There is a ton of content available online, but that is somebody, all you need is a smartphone, right? That's somebody with a smartphone going Facebook Live. But part of the role that WCET plays in events like that is that they are the one down on the field, and they are posting it to their YouTube and playing it on their channel for the grandmas that couldn't go, getting the good camera angle, and that keeps the 50 moms with a smartphone off the field trying to get the good camera angle to post it to their own YouTube, because WCET is taking care of it. My sister's husband is a videographer, and he does freelance. And what I know from conversations with him is that it costs a lot of money to hire someone like him to do the service. If WCET ceased to exist and wasn't showing the Jenison's Pink Out basketball game, wasn't showing graduations, wasn't showing concerts where attendance is kept to a minimum, where live audience is kept to a minimum because of COVID, all of those pieces, then somebody has to contract out services like Steve's to come in and do it and get the good camera angle, so that you have one person putting it out for mass consumption versus the 50 people all trying to get the good camera angle and put it out for mass consumption. I think the last time that this came up, the comment was made many times that we're just trying to save our taxpayers' money, we're trying to save our residents' money, which I understand and respect. But we have to remember that we're trying to save a couple dollars from people who are voluntarily opting into a cable contract. And this isn't something like property taxes where it is, you know, placed upon all people and something that as a municipality we are charging all of our residents. It's something that they are opting into. And that couple of dollars put together provides a service to the community, and that service needs to be able to ebb and flow over time. As Alan leaves WCET, they're going to have to, it's still the plan that where you are currently has to relocate, right? You can't stay in your current space, or yes? So it's up in the air where they're gonna land. I think that it is responsible that they're sitting on a balance of $232,000, because if they have to relocate the station to another place, and if that then is the time to go digital, that's going to be a serious financial investment. It bothers me that we're having a conversation about, like John said, pulling the legs out from under them when they're in a time of transition. I think that I agree with you, Catherine, that when I read through their plan, it doesn't seem like there's a very specific plan. But I think that that is often the nature of a transition of power, a transition of kind of who is leading the station. I feel like we need to, as Alan retires, congratulations on that, as Alan retires and as new leadership takes over that station, I think that we need to stay out of it, because it's people who opted into cable contracts that are paying for it. And we're one of those people. We are cable customers happily, and we happily pay the couple of dollars, because then when I'm at a basketball game or graduation or something and they've got the really good camera angle, then I can sit and enjoy it and don't have to worry about getting the really good camera angle, because I know I can look theirs up later. I would be in favor of revisiting this in a year or two, once the new leadership has taken over, once they have landed where they're going to land, post Alan's involvement with that. But I think that we just have to be really careful about this mindset that we're trying to save the taxpayers' money. It is nice of us to try to save money for people who opted into a cable contract. I know that there are thousands of people in our community that would be thankful for those couple of extra dollars. But the bottom line is, when there's lots of other options for how you get media content, people still opted into that knowing what the cost was going to be. And it doesn't seem like that $1 or $2 for people who are opting into it is going to be a huge game changer from the conversations I've had with people.
Can I ask you a couple questions, Becky? Then?
Yeah.
So, if the model that has been set up and has been supported through cable subscribers to put the station on cable TV,
Yep.
that model's dying and people aren't watching it, okay? But they're getting views on YouTube and the
Yep.
like, okay? Does that make it more inequitable yet that those paying those fees for the Comcast bill are paying for content that isn't finding its value in the TV presentation, but rather on another forum that has nothing to do with their cable bill or their cable TV stations? Does that change your opinion at all?
It doesn't, only because I think that the way that WCET is funded is certainly flawed. But we're not saying we're going to take this away and replace it with this much better model. We're saying this is the model that they're existing under, and we want to take it away.
All right, two questions then follow up to that. So one is, like I asked John, would there ever come a point where you would support possibly eliminating PEG fees, number one? And number two, would our withdrawal of PEG fees possibly be the accelerant that's needed for them to make significant change that otherwise this hasn't come about as we've kept kicking it down the road?
I would be absolutely in favor of revisiting it once WCET is under new leadership and we have seen kind of what their model is going to settle into in a post-COVID high access to digital content kind of world. I think that the people that are leading the charge on this strategic plan for WCET see the big picture, right? The same way that we do. And so I would be happy to revisit it, and it might change the direction of my support a year or two from now. But I just think that withdrawing support in a time of transition, when it isn't something that we're imposing upon our residents, it's something that they're opting into, I just think that taking away that support in their time of transition doesn't seem fair. I think that it is fair that we are having these conversations. I think it is fair to share with the people in charge of WCET's strategic plan that we are going to revisit this in a year, or we are going to revisit this in 2 years. We want to see where WCET settles as they go through their transition process, and then we're going to revisit it so that they don't endlessly count on Georgetown forever rubber stamping it and always giving them their PEG fees. I think it's fine that we put a revisit date on it and have a serious conversation. But to have that serious conversation when they're in the midst of a leadership change and it's kind of a hypothetical about what will WCET look like a year from now, just seems unkind and unfair when it isn't something that we are imposing upon our taxpayers. It's something they're opting into.
Gary, you're the only one we haven't heard from yet. Any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts.
Okay.
So, first of all, I didn't know what a PEG fee was until we brought this up a few months ago. I have cable, so I've been paying PEG fees. I don't even know whether they're on the bill. So I've been taxed and not even know if they're even on there. So, also, if you go with the contract, I've been going through this thing a little bit. PEG fees that come from Comcast are only for equipment. PEG fees that come from AT&T can be used for equipment or personnel. If you look at the dynamics of the township and the area, Comcast is growing faster than AT&T. I dropped AT&T. AT&T screwed up my internet, and so I went to Comcast. And so that changes money that's supposed to be spent. That's kind of a frustration I have with the contract. They got a contract. You read the agreement on here. The contract's between schools and communities. All I hear is we're talking with other communities and how to finance this thing. The contract's with schools. Schools need to be in this conversation too. How are you going to supply the building? How are you going to supply the personnel? That's your job. I don't see that happening here. The strategic plan that they got on this thing, all that is those guys' accomplishments is what they've done. I don't see anything on there that tells me what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. It's kind of frustrating. You can say bring in new leadership, but is that fair? If Al's going to retire and they're going to hire a new guy and a year from now we pull the PEG fees, now the guy doesn't have a job. Is this a time to make a change? I certainly want to take a new job and then pull PEG fees and all of a sudden he doesn't have a job. No, it'll look bad, don't we? And then the emotions are really going to come up. How dare you pull the PEG fees when we just hired a new guy? I'm a little concerned about that. I'm also a little bit frustrated by the fact that when we had this meeting in March, which was when the budget was supposed to come out for this year, I specifically said to Mr. Crombeen, Mr. Dodds, when we come to this meeting in June, you need to have a budget. And I was promised we would have one for this meeting. We do not have a budget. We keep hearing about equipment and digital and everything else. To be honest with you, I think a lot of that is just like owning a 5G phone, but you don't have a 5G tower. Doesn't make any difference. It still works on a 4G tower, but we don't have 5G towers in the township. We're probably working on those. It's the same thing with some of the equipment. You can say you want to go to digital, but now you got to get cameras that work that way. And it just seems like the whole thing hasn't been thought out. I can tell you that if you were coming here, if I was coming here to this meeting tonight, and I was worried about my money being pulled and I wasn't going to have a job, I would do a whole lot better job than the three things that are posted in this budget. Because I don't see a budget. I don't see an updated agreement. I don't see where there's been any school involvement with any meetings we've had with WCET. There's no more information here now than we met in March. So you've had April, May, June, you've had 3 months. Get your act together, because you want to save the building, but you're not doing anything to do it. I tell you guys, that's my frustration. I'll be right up front with you. I'm very frustrated. Because I'm like, we had this conversation, I asked very many questions on this thing, and none of them have been answered. This WCET presentation, there's no presentation there. It's just a presentation of what these guys do for a living. The model they have is, I don't know. I have to be honest with you, I'd vote to get rid of the whole thing because it doesn't seem like they care. If they wanted it so bad, they would have came with a proposal that actually said, hey, we want this. But I'm not seeing it. So there's my 2 cents worth.
If I may, they were meeting about every 2-3 weeks. Alan does have a budget that, as Ms. Henry had mentioned, the staff is so small. The other municipalities, Granville, Hudsonville, they do give all the fees. I'm not saying we're making a mistake in that, but he's on such a tight budget that in running the station, he pretty much has to do everything else himself. Makes it very difficult. And Chad was one of the first ones to sit down with him and come up with a hard budget years ago that he could follow as a pattern, and then take that to his advisory board and then guide him along with that. I'm not saying it's been a one-man operation, but pretty close to that.
But you, again, haven't said anything about Jenison, Hudsonville, or Granville Public Schools being in these meetings. And they are on the contract. I got an agreement right here, 2012. They signed it.
They're everywhere in the agreement.
What's that?
I mean, it's the school district shall, the school district will, the school
Yeah.
districts. I mean, every line item is the school districts, and they're not involved in this conversation.
And at one time, they thought there was a need for it because that's why they wanted it. They could do the basketball games, they could do the graduation, do all those things. But right now, there's not one school district cares if this thing succeeds. Guaranteed, you will not get a school district to sign this contract if you had to bring it back.
In fairness, several of the members on the strategic planning team were from the school. I mean, it wasn't like they were completely absent from the planning.
Okay.
But you're right, I don't think they contribute. If I remember correctly, I don't think they contribute financially to the endeavor, yeah.
And they're not supposed to contribute. It's the contract that we've been given, which is the same contract we were given months ago, says that it's the school district shall provide everything, training, annual budget, the supervision for all staff working on the WCET-TV project, management and supervisory personnel, establish rates for compensation. They're going to be the ones hiring the school district, and it would be the school districts not only hire the WCET staff members, but they become then employees of the school districts.
Right.
And they're supposed to provide, everything about the staff and the training. And yes, every single March is when the budget is supposed to be completed to have. So I don't, to me, it's not a matter of, it's not just, are there people from the schools attending the meetings? No, it's supposed to be the schools funding the entire thing, supervising the entirety of everything to do with having an employee, and they've dumped it all on him to do. I guess I don't know what the logistics are that got us to that point, but it sounds like it's been, like you said, for quite some time, it's been left to him to do, which doesn't sound like it's his fault. But going forward, we're basing this off of, this is a legally binding document, which, as the other attorney in the room, you know darn well about, and it's bothering me, like you said, Gary, that the schools aren't, why is it that we would continue putting any of our taxpayers on the hook for something, even if it seems like a small amount, when the huge stakeholders are not doing their job?
But we didn't put them on the hook. They opted into a cable contract.
That's not true, though, because people don't know what they're not signing up for PEG fees, they're signing up for cable. Right. And you have, two people that didn't even know About the PEG portion, they're on the board that have cable. I used to have cable a long time ago. I don't know if PEG fees were involved, so I wasn't going to speak either way on that for me, but I didn't know what they were either, even though I've had cable. So it's not, people are not signing up for PEG fees. They're not signing up for WCET. They're signing up for cable. So it's a totally different thing. I don't know.
challenge you to put that agreement together and bring it to all the 3 public schools and see if they'll sign it. I'm pretty sure nobody will take the bet if I want to make it either, because I don't think it's going to happen.
Well,
They don't seem to be fighting for it.
What's that? I'm sorry.
The public schools don't seem to be fighting for this. If this benefits them, they don't seem to care whether this thing succeeds or not. I'm not seeing any representation other than, I mean, you guys are teachers in public school, but
It's been a robust discussion, and it's not the only one that we've had. I guess I'd like to look to board members and say, is there anyone who would like to place a motion before the board? Be that to act on something tonight, or as Becky suggested, to wait for a future date, or what's the consensus or the
I think you
attitude of
have
the
a
board?
motion that was postponed.
Excuse me?
I think you have a motion already that's postponed, depending if you're ruling that out, but
You mean to bring it back on the table?
yeah, it was postponed to today, so it's already,
Yeah, there's a
Or you-
motion and a
Nothing that would
second.
prevent us from making a new motion of the same
Correct.
kind, right?
substitute that out.
I'd like to. I'd like to call for whether there is a motion. I'd like to see,
I would like to see us wait a year and give them a chance. And if I see that things are not progressing, I could vote against it. But I think to have had all this manpower put in, and the assistant superintendents attended these meetings, so it wasn't like it was a low level. Alan operates out of Hudsonville Schools, and so he's got a pretty good chunk of their facility that they're taking care of. I'm pretty sure that they took care of his retirement. So there's been a commitment by the schools. I have not looked, I've not been involved, or I got right in with a budget of what the schools are paying, but their involvement has been very extensive. They would like to see it tied more in with the curriculum of the schools. They're very impressed. That's why they've tried to keep this going. Now, should they have been paying more cash? I don't know. I don't. But his facility was in Hudsonville. Within a year, we're going to know if they found a location, who their leadership is going to be. They're going to have hard numbers for us. And it may be that they just can't survive no matter what we do. The comment was made about a broken model. I agree with that. I think the model is broken. That is, so they're trying to come up with a methodology that will keep things going as technology changes. But I think we're being premature by taking an action at this time and not giving them a chance. If there was not this heavy involvement with Hudsonville and Granville, I'd be more comfortable at saying, okay, it doesn't look like this is going to make it. They've put their best hitters out there trying to keep this thing going. And I believe, I can't say this for sure, but it was out by Holland where they pulled the plug. And there was a tremendous outcry when people said, you mean I don't get to see my kids at Christmas singing their songs and games, and this stuff isn't available anymore? You know, we lost the advance. In many ways, it crippled our community. More profound than I knew it would be bad, but not this bad. There's just basic things the public does not know about what's going on in our community, and it hurts us because we'll have some wonderful things that happen here, and someone will get on social media and have a completely different view that gets all kinds of notice, and it hurts our community because there isn't that truth sayer out there. Now, I'm not saying WCET is like that, but in some respects they are. There used to be the gentleman that had Georgetown talk show was incredible, and he would get big hitters from around the state that would come into his program and ask questions. And Jim, you and I were on there years ago.
I recall being
Not
on
that
there
we're big hitters,
a couple of times.
but he was fantastic.
Yeah.
So they've tried to do creative things like that. I think with the history they've had with our community, the positive good work that they've had, all these people that are trying to help it to survive, and I think it's an uphill push by far.
A point of
Why
order,
not
Jim.
come back in a year? In a year, we vote on this, and
Jim,
you might have a
Trying a
unanimous.
point of order, I think we need to call the question because there was a motion and a second, and although you can have another motion, there is a motion and a second, so I'm going to call the question.
Yeah, the motion that was previously made was motioned by me and seconded by you. Since then, there's been a lot that has passed, and I've looked to my left to Michael, and he's sitting on that committee, hopeful that you had a motion, or at least would give a definitive as to what you think about the motion.
But you
that
have
we
to make a
previously
ruling
did.
on my point of order, and if you don't decide to go forward with calling the question, then we need to bring it to the whole board about whether we're going to vote on it. So that's what, I mean, in following our proper procedures, that's what,
So help me with that. We could have a new motion, or we could bring the previous motion before the board, either one.
we have to settle the old motion, though. We
Yes.
can't, we have a motion that was tabled until this point.
Sure.
Correct.
So you can't just act like, we're starting from scratch. I mean,
Sure.
I think what Dan was trying to clarify with your question is if somebody, if we ended up having a motion that essentially encompassed, tabling or dismissing the current motion, then having some sort of new motion, that can happen. But you've tried to ask about that several times. At this point, nobody's made any new motions. We do have a motion, we have a second. And so with Robert's Rules of Order and calling the question, meaning we've had enough discussion, we just need to bring it to a vote.
Okay, well, that is the point of order then. I'll look to our clerk to my right here. You know the previous motion that was made was to eliminate PEG fees, was seconded. And I think it would be a roll call vote then,
Okay. Mrs. Henry?
To eliminate is the,
is the yes.
yes,
Yes.
then yes.
Mrs. Steele?
No.
Mr. Valdink?
Yes.
Mr. Swam?
No.
Treasurer?
Yes.
Clerk is a yes. Supervisor?
Yes.
5-2.
Okay. Well, the postmortem, I guess, is the one in the middle chair who can speak to that to some degree, is that I think a decision like that can be an accelerant to something that brings about change. Because I think, to your point, John, I think we want more communication. I'm just not sure that this has been fulfilling it. So